here we are in October of 2020. My sister was getting married in North Carolina, and I went back home. And that was the last trip I ever had when I was drinking, you know?
Hmm.
Last trip when I was traveling, I was drinking. So I just remember that trip being a blur. It was an absolute blur. And right before I'm sorry, Ray. It was a blur, but I remember every single thing from that trip. And I think it was meant for me to remember every single thing from that trip so I can go back and say, you know what, this is where you don't want to be at again.
Right.
My mom woke me up early the morning of me leaving to go to the airport. She woke me up and it was very, very early. And she said, I need for you to sit down at the den for a second, JT. And my mama never will never like, hey, I need to talk to you. She never does. I have not had that since I was a child.
Right.
So she said, listen, I love you very, very much, but you need to stop drinking. You need some help. You need to stop because if you don't, you will die, and I'm not sure what I'll do without you.
Mm.
And if I was a fly on the wall, I know for a fact that I was probably looking mopey and looking down and say, okay, mama, I hear you and everything. And I know that she was hurting because she saw her son being this way,
And
you
probably
know?
had been for some time, right? And I'm assuming it took her a minute to kind of even get to a point where she could have that conversation with you.
Exactly. And here's the thing, in full transparency, my father is a functioning alcoholic. He's an alcoholic.
Mm.
He's still present, but he's still alive, but he's an alcoholic. So the fact that my mother does not want a part two of that, her being her own child.
Yep.
So I remember going back, heading to LA. She dropped me off at the airport. She gave me a big hug and a kiss. She said, I love you so much. Please get some help.
Mm.
And I said, yes, ma'am. So I remember going through TSA. TSA stopped me. There was something in my bag. And I'm like, what could be in my bag? It was a big old can of beer. And I'm like, oh God. So,
You're like, all right, I'll start tomorrow.
uh, anyways, I had a layover in
Mm.
Chicago O'Hare, had a Bloody Mary, landed at LAX that early evening, stopped by one of my watering holes on the west side, had a couple of beers, got back home, back in my area from the train station, walked home, stopped by a girlfriend's house, one of my neighbors, to drop off some gifts from North Carolina, had a glass of Chardonnay, which was my last ever alcoholic beverage.
Mm.
And the next morning, Ray, I woke up feeling defeated.
Mm.
For the first time ever, I felt defeated. And I said, God, I cannot do this anymore. I'm giving it to you because I just can't do it anymore. I'm
Yeah.
tired. I was crying. I was sobbing. I called one of my dear friends from Pennsylvania, who at the time was sober for 5 years. She has about almost 9 years now. I said, "Hey, I can't do this anymore." So she gave me a link to a meeting to join that evening, and she was so amazing. That day she was on call for me. She was checking in on me every single minute. I remember that October the 15th, 2020.
Mm.
That's where it all began. October the 15th, 2020.
Wow.
And ever since then, here we are, uh 3 years and 8 months. I
That's
want to say
awesome.
3 years, 6, 7. Yep, 3 years and 8 months. We're here 3 years and 8 months.
Well, look, let me just say first and foremost, congratulations on arriving at where you are today after such a a windy path that you've been on. So hats off to you. I mean, it's not easy, and I know what that feeling of being defeated at how that feels, and what they say, you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, but more so outside of that, it's just like you're afraid, You don't have any direction. You've basically pushed everyone away. So who's going to be there to support you? I mean, there's a
Mhm.
lot of ambiguity that comes with the territory and arriving at that moment in time. So I'm glad that you were able to find the support, find the community, and find it within yourself to stay the path. And here you are 3.5 years later, able to tell the story, and and not maybe at that point where your gut was telling you that you might end up at, right? And I think that that's a huge testament to the changes that you've made in your life. So thank you for sharing that with us here.
Mm. Of
Um,
course. Thank you for allowing me to share it with you, Ray.
yeah, absolutely.